Well, greetings to you all, friends. My name is Chaplain Matt Dinkins, and I serve as chaplain at Matthews Glen. I want to begin today with a story. This story has to do with former President Jimmy Carter. It was the 1990s. This was well after his presidency had ended, and he had been invited to be a guest on the David Letterman talk show. While he was on the talk show, he was telling a story of when he had traveled to Japan for a speaking tour. And he didn't speak the native language, so he had to rely on an interpreter to translate for him when he was speaking. And he said at one of his stops, he told a little joke. And the translator shared that to the crowd. And he said the crowd just erupted in laughter. And he couldn't believe it because he had not expected that reaction. So he was very pleased and thankful that they reacted this way. Well, later that day, he was talking to a good friend who had been in attendance at this stop, and this friend was fluent in Japanese. And he said, "Jimmy, I'm going to have to tell you the real reason why that crowd laughed at your joke." He said after he had told the joke, the interpreter there said, "President Carter has told a very funny joke. You need to laugh now." And that's why they laughed. So the joke ended up being on poor President Carter that day, uh, rather than his joke actually landing with the crowd. And I love that story. I mean, it's a funny story, but I think it's very applicable to us as well. I wonder sometimes if we can kind of be like that crowd. You know, the crowd was just doing as they were told. They've been told to laugh, and they did. I wonder if sometimes we fall into that mindset in our lives, a do as we're told mindset. We let life become predictable and routine and just kind of get set in our ways. We don't allow room for Jesus to come in and to shake us up and mix things up for us. I want to share a story from the Bible with you and help us think about that. It's from Mark 1:21 and 22. This was at the beginning of Jesus' ministry. He had just called his disciples, and they had traveled to Capernaum, and they gathered in a local synagogue. That was often Jesus' approach in his ministry, was to go to the local synagogue and visit with folks. That was the gathering place. And so he would teach and socialize and debate with folks. So hear this from Mark as we think about that. Mark 1:21 and 22. They went to Capernaum, and when the Sabbath came, he entered the synagogue and taught. They were astounded at his teaching, for he taught them as one having authority, and not as the scribes. So he shook the people up that day. You know, they had just kind of come and expected the routine, kind of expected the scribes to lead them as they usually did in their traditions. But Jesus came in and did something different that day. He really taught with authority. And it caught the people's attention. It shook them up. And they noticed. And I just love that. It's just a small little, 2-verse passage there in the Bible. It's very easy to overlook, but we see that Jesus came in and he did something different in these folks' lives that they weren't expecting. And I just give that to you today to think about. Are you leaving room in your life to let Jesus do that for you? Are you allowing him to challenge you, to call you to something that you might not be thinking about or might not want to do because of where you are in life and what you're doing right now and the routine you might be in? I think there's an openness that Jesus wants from us to follow him. And it does take a willingness on our part and an openness to really be shaken up by Him. So I'll leave that with you today, something to think about, is to leave that room in your heart to be open for Him. Thank you for hearing this today. I wish you all a blessed day and a blessed week.